All right, hello everyone. Today we'll be talking about, happy Monday of course. Today we'll be talking about Sumer. That word is not summer. The season of summer, has two M's in it. This is Sumer. It's the first civilization in Mesopotamia that rises once we have agriculture and farming and people having control of their food source, that surplus of food, having more than you need. So I'm going to go through this lesson here. You're going to see words that are bolded once again, and those, remember, are your vocabulary words, and it's important that you're recording them either on notes in a notebook, on a piece of paper, or if you are using, the Cornell notes or whatever else, a Word doc, whatever you're doing, make sure that you're keeping track of all of your vocabulary, because there will be a quiz on that coming up pretty soon. So Sumer, and we'll talk first about how it formed its first city-states. So in this, you'll be able to understand the social hierarchy, which is the social pyramid of early Mesopotamian society. That's what we'll talk about today. This is how power and jobs were divided up. So here we go. Most people that lived in the civilization of Sumer were farmers, and they lived in rural areas. Rural areas. That's that word, vocab word, rural, for you. It just means the countryside. Think of Westport. A lot of farms, a lot of open space, not a ton of people. And that's a rural area. And it's because it's farmland. It's farmers that are growing, and you can't, if they're growing things, you can't just build houses everywhere. And so most people in Sumer were farmers that lived in rural countryside areas that grew crops, and they were part of the agriculture of growing that surplus. Sumerian society, the actual society, where lots of people had different jobs and lived close together, it was located in the urban, which is your vocab word, the urban areas. And that just means cities. So rural is Westport, and urban is New Bedford, like where you live. Lots of people, not a huge space, not a lot of farms, or any farms really, not huge yards in front of people's houses at times, and that's because most of the space is being used for living areas. So rural and urban, countryside and cities. And so these two spaces, these two areas, rural and urban areas, the cities and the countryside, it's this vocab word that's formed. Sumer was the first city-state, and it's a term that we'll be using a lot this year in ancient history, especially when we get to Greece. And so it literally is one half of a city and one half of the surrounding state area. It consists of a city and all the countryside around it. Now remember that in an urban area, you're not farming and growing food. That's the job of the farmers in the rural area. And essentially what happens is the farmers provide food for the city because they can't grow food themselves. But the people in the urban area provide things to the people in the rural areas. It's a relationship between the two. They need each other, and they both provide a function for the other. Okay? Here's an illustration of a Sumerian city-state of Ur. And you can probably zoom on this, but it's important for you to, if you can't read these text boxes, I'm going to ask that you look at its physical characteristics. I mean, there's this land around it here. It looks like this blue is water, what that might be. You have, it's surrounded by something. You have a lot of smaller homes here. You have larger structures here. You have what looks like a temple. So you would think about like a megalith, what this temple would represent, what it would be used for, and who might live in these larger buildings or palaces. That gives you a hint there. That's a question that you're going to be answering in a little while. So we're going to talk about the social pyramid of Sumer. Social hierarchy is a vocab word. A social hierarchy is the division of society based by rank or class. And so it really just means the people at the top of this pyramid, shaped like a triangle, the people at the top have more power, the people at the bottom have less power. It's shaped like a triangle for a reason. And the social hierarchy of any society, especially Sumer, is based on a society having what we call a division of labor. Now, when you do math and you divide a number, if you divide 4, and how many times 2 goes into 4, it's 2 times. So you're dividing it up. You're separating up that number 4. So if it's society, you're dividing labor, the jobs that people have. It's when each worker is specially trained to do just one specific job and to do it like a pro. Your teachers, your math, science, ELA, or social studies teachers, we're trained specially to do this one job. I could not teach math, but I know that I'm pretty good at teaching social studies because that's what I'm specifically trained to do. If you become a doctor, then you're not probably going to make a great teacher, but you're really good in medicine and treating people, and that's not something somebody that's trained like me as a teacher could do. So a division of labor is when each worker is specifically trained to do one job and do it really well, like an expert, like a pro. And that's how a social hierarchy is determined. The job that you have determines the rank that you have in this society. And so a social hierarchy is usually illustrated, or almost always illustrated, as a pyramid, as a triangle. Think of the food pyramid. At the top of the food pyramid is the junk food that you're not supposed to have a lot of. And as the pyramid grows larger at the bottom, it's okay to have more and more servings of that food because it's not as bad for you. So a social hierarchy, a social pyramid is the same way. So I designed this here. Fancy, I know. So the social hierarchy or social pyramid has 5 levels, and those levels will change, and the amount of levels and the people that have those jobs and those levels will change throughout each society. But for Sumer, at the top are the people in charge, the kings. There are not a lot of people that are in charge, so that's why it's the smallest number or the smallest group at the top. Remember, this is just a design that shows you what the society was like. And they're not actually living in a pyramid that has different levels on it. This is just symbolic of all the people that could fit in this one giant pyramid if that actually happened. So the kings are at the top, and just below the kings are the priests. Religion is extremely important in ancient Sumer. Oops, let me stop that. And in ancient Sumer, if the people couldn't understand why something was happening, like in nature, or why thunder and lightning was occurring, they would blame it on the gods. And you might understand later this week we'll talk about their religion itself. I said gods with an S. Today, not entirely, but a vast majority of the world's major religions have one major god that are in charge, or that are the person that is usually worshipped. In the ancient world, there were lots and lots of gods and goddesses. Which is, women as well or priests and priestesses. So priests had a lot of power because they're up here on the social pyramid, and there were not a whole lot of them. And that's kind of how they maintain their power, a small number of people. But it'll be more than the number of people that are kings in charge of that society, but it's still a smaller number. Lower on this social pyramid, which means a little less power than the priests, who have even less power than the kings, are these 2 groups here. Merchants, who are people that sell things, and craftsmen, who are people that make things. They might be making baskets, they might be making pottery, they might be making weapons, clothing, things like that, things that you need. And they're crafting them with their hands and the few tools that they have. You'll see that there's a larger number of people that are merchants and craftsmen. Something interesting here to point out is that merchants and craftsmen also make a fair amount of money because they are skilled at what they do. If you're a merchant, that means you trade things and you sell them, and you need to, sales is really important. If you're not going to convince someone to buy what you want to sell, then you're not going to make money. And if you're not very good at crafting or making things, then you're not going to sell them to people like merchants that sell them to other people, like the priests, the kings, the farmers. Further down this social hierarchy, this social pyramid, you have the farmers themselves. There has to be a lot of them. I already explained to you that here it says most people were farmers who lived in these rural countryside areas. So that's why a large number of people in this pyramid, it grows this way. It gets wider or fatter at the bottom. Farmers are the people that produce food, and the more people you have in your society, in your civilization, or ultimately in your city-state, that's not a little town, guys. That's a big city-state. Probably thousands, and then eventually tens of thousands of people living there. So you need a large number of farmers to be producing that food. And at the bottom, unfortunately, in the ancient world was always slaves. Most societies had slaves. It's important to know that slavery in Sumer especially was not based on your race. It was not based on skin color like the unfortunate history in the United States. In fact, slaves were people that were from other city-states that were usually captured or conquered in warfare, and then they were made to do the really bad jobs that no one else wanted to do. They didn't have freedom. Farmers don't make a lot of money. They work really long, hard days, and it's really dirty as a job. You know, they're getting covered in dirt, and they're working outside all day in the sun. It's hot. It's very unpleasant. But they at least make a little bit of money, and they are free to make their own decisions. Slaves are considered property, and essentially property of the king himself and the people that rule. And the slaves are laborers that do the really tough jobs, and they do not have a long life expectancy. That means how long that you're expected to live for, unfortunately. So that was a necessary, what we call a necessary evil in the ancient society before they got smarter and wiser and understood that slavery is not okay. And so, to remember how the social pyramid works before I send you off to do your work, why is it a pyramid shape? It is a pyramid shape because the top holds a small amount of people and only one person or a few people can be the ruler, the king, or the queen. It widens on the way down, and that's why we use that pyramid shape, because many more people have those other jobs. If you're a skilled merchant who sells things or a skilled craftsman, not everyone has, those mad skills. And so you're not going to have a huge number of people living in this part of society, but you will have a larger number as we go down. And so it widens as other people have those more common jobs, the easier jobs, easier in the sense of less skilled jobs, like a farmer. And slaves might have been skilled, but once they became a slave or were captured by, Sumer against another civilization, then it didn't matter what their actual skilled job was, they became a laborer and a slave. And this means that the top of the pyramid is less people with more power. That is very important for you to understand. Less people, more power at the top of the pyramid. Kings are the people that make the rules. Priests are the people that speak directly with the gods. They are incredibly important, and there's not very many of them. This also means the bottom of the pyramid is many more people with much less power. And if you're talking about slaves, no power. Zero. They don't even have their own freedom. The only difference between a farmer and a slave is that the farmers are free human beings, and they grow the food, and the slaves have no freedoms. So again, the top of the pyramid, less people, much less people. That's why it's a tiny little area with much more power. And the bottom is more people with less power, or in the case of the slaves, with no power. So now you're going to go and read your directions on the Google Doc, and you're going to use complete sentences. It is very important for you to do that to receive credit, and it's even more important to read the questions. Some of these questions have more than one part to them, especially where I ask you to explain or describe your answer. If you don't do that, and you just use a complete sentence to answer the question, but you don't explain it more, if you don't explain it further, you will not receive credit for it, and that's an expectation that we have in 7th grade.